Okay, I think I lost Kate, but she will be here in a second. She was here a minute ago. That's the little thing about live streaming. Oh, there's Kate. Okay, we got her. I'm gonna go ahead and add you. So we are live. I hope that's okay. Is that?
I think that is super.
Okay.
I think that's super. I just want to go and move the lights out of the way
Okay.
so that they're not just glaring at
Oh,
everybody.
okay.
And I just wanted.
Oh, I gotta close that up. Oh, you don't want to be on yet. Okay, I see. Did I unadd you or? I'll wait to add Kate because I think she's rearranging her lights. So anyway, here's Kate's book, How to Read Cursive Fast. So I'm also gonna add, I think I may have put in the description, but we've done many live streams. Are you ready, Kate? Should we add you back or no? Are you still getting ready? Or?
No, I think I'm good. I think I'm good. I just want to. Why is this? This is normally I can get these lights to behave a little better than they are today, and I'm not sure what. There we go.
Okay, great.
And you see,
So,
and I have my book all nice.
yay, we have it. Yeah.
Yep.
So I have a new appreciation. Like I really love everything you always share with us, but now that I have the book, I'm like it's so well put together, and I see all your work.
We really worked hard on that. In fact, you will note that the illustrator gets credit, and not just because her last name is the same as that of the boss. My publisher, I know that the illustrator and the publisher are related. I don't know how, but they have the same very unusual last name. And I'm glad she got credit. We did try some various options for illustrating, but things didn't really go right until we got the person who we now have. Now, I hope that fan is not distracting. I can turn it off, but it does get a little hot in here. So if I put it back on,
Oh no, it's fine. If you want it on, it's all good.
I would like it, but I'm worried that someone is going to say why she's got that. Well, regardless, here I am, ready to go, and hoping. Why do I think? I don't know. Anyway, so I understand that we had a lot of questions today.
Yeah, I have some big questions. So like now that I started looking through your book, I'm just curious. Well, the first one I want to ask is who did all the handwriting? Did the illustrator or did you do the handwriting?
I did most of it.
Oh wow.
Fonts. Some of the stuff on the worksheets is by the illustrator because at one point some of the worksheets that I did wouldn't photograph well for some unknown reason. So the illustrator actually stepped in and did some by hand. So I had tried to make the handwritings on the worksheets look different from one another, but when you see like this sort of big, fat, sort of blocky looking cursive, that is the illustrator's own handwriting because he stepped in. I actually think it was a plus because this way people can see handwritings from two different people,
For sure,
I think that's a plus. Also, her handwriting, I tried to be deliberately not always neat, but her handwriting, she was able to make it look very naturalistic. It's hard to make it intentionally just messy enough to pose a problem for the beginner.
That's true.
One of the things we all found out. Now, a lot of the handwriting is by me, things where I have the exercises in the worksheets where I have drawn individual letters, words, or phrases. Those are my handwriting, but not as I normally write. I do not normally write in cursive. As you know, I normally do italic script.
I love it.
But I can do cursive, So that's my normal handwriting as compared with what you see in the book, where I tried to basically do a school model. Now, those things, the stories, are actually done in fonts. I actually went and found fonts that were either public domain or for which I could get the license.
Okay, so this page is of fonts right here.
Yeah, anything with the stories in it in section 2. What I did, rather than write those by hand, I actually looked for fonts that had, you might say, different degrees of cursiveness.
Okay, because I write like this one, kind of. That's why I'm interested. I was like, that's kind of how I was taught how to write.
It took a long time to get those, to get those right, to get the margins right, and so on, and to come on the proper sequence. Basically, I wanted what I think of as a wading pool for reading handwriting. You know, you take your kid to learn to swim, and you often take them to a pool where there's, a little children's end that's a few inches deep, and then the grown up's end is maybe 12 feet deep. Well, I wanted to do the same thing rather than throw people into, a massive, here is cursive, now read it. I wanted to have something where you'd start with very familiar looking printing, type font, handwritten, printed type font, which basically was a quasi italic handwriting, and throw in a few more features of cursive at every step so that you can adjust. And if you follow this, you actually, here, let me move this bolster away. I don't really need it. And if
Okay.
you follow this sequence, since the stories obviously repeat words, for instance, if the story about a cat, so the word cat appears in it a few times, or the name of the cat, you can see the changes. For instance, the name of the cat has a few instances of the letter S, so you get to see different variants of the letter S, which is an extremely common letter and not an easy one to figure out.
Oh, you're right. Definitely. And you know what? When I saw it on the live stream, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I saw that it was different, but the thing I'm going to just say about why people should buy the physical book is because you can hold it and you
Mm-hmm.
can actually see the differences. And I think this would be
Yes,
great for
yeah.
kids.
Now the book
Yeah.
is only out as a physical book. There's a PDF copy that we have sent to reviewers, so we don't mail the book, but it's not being sold as an ebook. I might be able to change my publisher's mind on that, but only if I sold a lot, I think. In
Yeah.
other words, it's hard to get, it's hard to get your money's worth if you're making an ebook, because you have to take precautions so that no one will be able to copy it and so on. So
Exactly.
at the
Exactly.
moment, this is a physical book. Now, even given that it's a physical book, and given that shipping costs outside the U.S. are as high as they are, we
hmm
have had requests from people all over the world. And in fact, today, right as we go into this, I'd heard from a couple of people who are considering becoming authorized resellers. They just want to wait until the coronavirus situation is a little more normal in their country so that mail delivery will not be impeded. Now, and these are from people whose countries, in whose countries English is not necessarily the native language, although it's a language that a lot of people study in school
hmm
from an early age. And obviously, they may run into documents from the USA. So the fact that this book is from the USA is not really an obstacle.
Exactly. You're right. But you know what I love though, actually, is that if somebody wants to learn English, like American English, the examples in this book are give like because some people that want to learn American English, they're interested in historical documents, the Constitution, genealogy. I have
Yes,
cousins around the world. Like I found a cousin recently in Germany, and if we were like to share historical documents like census records, some of them are in cursive. I found two examples. So your book might help somebody that doesn't know how to
exactly. In
read.
fact, a
Yeah.
couple of our early reviewers were genealogists, including one who has a genealogy program where she teaches kids to read old documents, and one who works with interns. And a lot of the interns in their 20s or 30s either never were taught anything about cursive, or they had some sort of superficial lesson once in the third grade and eventually forgot it. We have had praise and interest from those circles as well. Now, I will tell you that when the book was being reviewed, the history section was originally a lot larger, but all USA documents. We had to cut it to keep the size and price of the book reasonable, because access for us is very important. We don't want to have a great book that's too much and too fat and no one will buy it. So, what we did was we moved 90% of the history material to the book's website. If you go to readcursivefast.com, go to the drop down menu, Read Cursive Fast, the book, and look for patriotic penmanship, you will see that section. Over the year, as time permits, I probably will be adding more historical things from the USA to that section. I have a list of things to do once we start putting together a newsletter, which we are putting together. If anyone who wants to write puts Read Cursive Fast and puts I want the newsletter somewhere, I will put you on the list for when the newsletter launches. But I won't do it with anyone's consent, at least not until I figure out how to set up an unsubscribe link. I'm still learning a lot about the internet, and I have to say that I'm not going to open the newsletter until we have a bug-free unsubscribe link, because that would not be fair.
Oh, I
But we will have
understand.
it, and we have a lot of stuff from the history section on there, and there is more that's waiting to go into the history section. The newsletter is likely, of course, also to have non-USA material, but for what's on the internet, since I titled the section Patriotic Penmanship, at the moment I want it USA only. We may do a global section later. It depends on available time, energy, and on how well the book does. The more people buy it, the more I will be motivated to sit and put stuff onto the website.
For
So
sure.
keep this in mind. Also, I would love this book to stay in print. The only way it gets to stay in print is if we sell 1,000 copies of
Well,
this
I think
printing.
you will. It's really good. And oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about something else in the book. Okay, so
Yes,
I learned how to write with these flourishes, but I love like the part when you said, sometimes the flourishes are hard for, people to understand, especially if they don't understand cursive. So what are your thoughts on all the flourishes and
my
um
thoughts are that there are people who love those flourishes and love to do them. As director of the World Handwriting Contest, I constantly see a whole spectrum of handwritings, good and bad, and the good ones and the bad ones can be flourished or not. My only concern about flourishes, well, I have several concerns. One, they should, I think, be elective rather than mandatory. When they're made mandatory, a percentage of people either cannot do them or cannot do them well at a practical speed for writing. We've all seen people who have beautiful handwriting for the first 2 or 3 words of an essay test answer, and then it falls apart because they realize they can't take forever on it. So we
yeah.
have that issue. Number two, we have the issue that it does take time. And number three, we have the issue that people who are learning cursive, if they have not seen a plain form of writing and only the flourishes have forevermore been mandatory, then they have a lot of trouble distinguishing, well, what part of the letter is letter and what is flourish. I'm going to go and write something. For instance, this
Oh
is
great.
an example that I'm going to be concocting, that a similar version appears in the book. And let's see if I can switch my, oh, I'm trying to switch the camera around. Oh,
Oh
very
yeah, like do the
exciting.
switch around.
Front
Yeah. That's
camera,
always the
yes.
fun
And look,
part.
very well, now we have here,
Oh nice. This is
we would
beautiful.
not know, if you did not know how to read or how to read cursive, there would be no obvious way to associate one of these with the other. In other words, you know what a G is. You know that every part that we see in a printed G has to be there to be recognized. If I left out one part, I'd get a C or something. With here, it's not necessarily clear what parts make it a G. It's not necessarily clear that I have to move this away to write, but I am going to go literally only that upper right corner of the letter is what makes it G. The rest of it is wind in and wind out flourishes. So, how did we get a G historically? This is an extremely oversimplified portrayal, but if we look at, 2,000 years of the letter G, now if someone had explained to you this is how G happened, this is how the cursive G happened, you would be able to read all of these, remember which one was the G, as opposed to being the very similar letter S. How do you
Hmm.
know they're different? You know they're different if you know how it happened. And S, of course, has its own similar history, which I'm not bothering to draw. But if you are not taught how it happened, then it's just, well, you might as well be taught, here is a bucket of random cooked spaghetti strands. And remember that this bucket is a capital G and this other one is a capital S. And if you ask, why, how did it happen? And I've known kids to ask in classrooms, and unfortunately I've sometimes observed or long ago even been that kid who was told, well, there's no reason. It just always was. Learn it. Remember,
Oh,
there's
no, I
always.
hate that
Now,
explanation. No,
if it now it was In other words, you might as well tell them that the letters were dropped onto Mount Sinai by the letter fairy. It would be about as sensible. But why not show them how it happened? Once you see how a capital G happened, a capital S happened, and all the rest of it. Now, just excuse me while I erase my board. Once you see how that happened, you won't mix them up and you'll be able to read them. Now, I have discussed on, with you at other times, the fact that there was actually an investigative report in Canada's largest newspaper, the Toronto Star, of all places, back in 2013, investigating whether people who had been taught cursive as children at age 8 were still able to write it, or to read it, let alone to write it at the time that they were 18 and entering college. They literally went around and let me get off this board. They literally went around and interviewed college students, some of whom had been from provinces where cursive was mandated at the time they were in school, and some of them not. And in other words, depending on where they'd gone to school, that was the only difference in their education, where they had gone to school, and therefore whether their school required cursive. So it was like having a controlled experiment. And they found that the kids who had been through mandated cursive, second or third grade, you must learn cursive, you must read cursive, you must write cursive, during their elementary schooling, by the time they got to college, most of them were not any better to read cursive than the ones who had simply never had it. In other words, zilch. Now, I am convinced, through having talked with a lot of people in many age groups over the years, people who remembered cursive, people who forgot it, people who never learned it, I am convinced that they did not retain it because it was taught as sort of a rote procedure, and then not just a rote procedure, but something that you did not really see in normal life. If you see something constantly, you can learn it by rote. Think of
For
people
sure.
in various cultures or religions who learn poetry and songs and prayers by rote, even if the song or the prayer or whatever is in the language that they don't understand. But you
Hmm.
have to see it constantly for rote learning to happen and to be retained. If you don't see it constantly, if you see cursive a few minutes a day in school,
Hmm.
or out on the street looking at a shop sign, or in a museum looking at some old document, you are not going to, retain it if you don't have understanding. In other in other words, for instance, I'm 58, and I can remember being a kid, being 8, and seeing my mom very regularly write letters by hand to people. It might
Hmm.
have been to the bank or to the electric company or to some relative. It might have been anything. If I had been a kid today, those letters would have been email, or
Yes.
or something that I would not have seen ever. Letters in the act of being written, I would only have seen completed letters, which don't give a clue as to what part goes first, what goes second, what is the structure that underlines what you see. So and so so today we have a lot of kids who might very well be reading before they go to school. Okay, but they are reading, but they're not reading from handwritten letters at any point. They're reading, from a book or from a computer screen. They haven't seen handwriting. But of course, when we think of letters, we think of how to make them. So by the time they get into school, they've made up their own ideas of how it's made. I've seen kids
Yeah.
who could read at age 4, maybe, or age 2 even, but they didn't know where a capital R starts. They could read it, they could read robot, reindeer, anywhere you wanted with an R in it, but
Yeah.
they had no idea where it started. And of course, this is an impediment to learning any handwriting, and to seeing how one style of handwriting relates to and derives from another. However, if you give the kid that understanding as soon as he reads print, you can show him, well, there's this other stuff. It's very strange looking, but some people like to do it. So you'll see it being done. You'll see documents that have such writing, and here is how it happened. Then you can read it. I actually have taught kids, including my niece, who was then 5, how to read cursive. And I literally taught my niece, who could read print, how to read cursive during a
Oh,
family
wow.
visit. I was literally there, I think it was the day before Thanksgiving, and she had a storybook which had something in it on the title page, some very fancy caption that was in cursive in this book of fairy tales. I forget what
Hmm.
it was, but I showed her how to read it. And my mom, her grandmother, who was there, absolutely freaked out
Oh
when
my,
my niece Sadie was reading stuff in cursive. And people will say, oh, you must learn to write cursive in order to read it. And that's the rationale for mandating cursive.
no, that's
Well,
not
one,
true.
writing cursive is not the only way to read it. And number two, it's possible to learn to write cursive and then forget the whole thing if you haven't actually been shown it in such a way that the reading portion of it at least would stick. Remember those college first year students in Canada? They were reported on in 2013. Well, it's now 2021. A lot of them will have jobs. Some of them will be parents. Some might even be teachers or teachers' aides. And I
That's
can
true.
tell you from comments I've heard from people who are or were within various of the cursive handwriting publishing companies, and these are people who don't want to be named, maybe, and they don't want their company to be named because they're working there, or even if they left, they know people there after all. They are literally running out of teachers who are able to read the cursive book that the teacher may
Yeah.
be required to use if the state has a cursive mandate. Not all the US states do, but about 20 of them do. The number has
Oh,
varied over the
interesting.
years. In other words, Common Core state standards, which are the federal
Yeah,
standards,
the
don't
common
require
corporate.
they don't
Yeah.
require cursive. They require printing, but a lot of the states either always had a cursive requirement or kept it, or they put one back in. Now,
Hmm.
I will be very honest. I don't normally have a lot of kind words to say for Common Core, and I don't think it's my expertise anyway. But I will tell you that in the case of handwriting and one other subject, foreign languages, the Common Core people actually had a reason that they did not want to have grade by grade standards
Okay.
in handwriting after the beginning, and why they did not want foreign languages in Common Core. So Common Core is devoid of those two areas, devoid of foreign languages and devoid of handwriting after, I think, grade two, and up to then
Huh.
it's only printing. And the reason was, since different handwriting curricula and also different foreign languages are different, it would be very hard to arrange things. In other words, some handwriting curricula start cursive from the get go. Some started in grade two, some started in grade three, some don't have it. So if you were to have this, you could have situations where students are in a given grade, Common Core comes in across the board, and they would not learn it. Just as in foreign languages, the reason that the Common Core people decided that even though they thought foreign languages should be there, they could not have it, was that what happens, given that Common Core basically started to be enforced across the board in the same year for
Hmm.
everyone, what happens if, let's say, Common Core decided that fourth graders start a foreign language, fifth graders take a second year of the foreign language, and let's say you're in fifth grade when they roll in Common Core, do they walk you down the hall to second year Japanese because Common Core says? Now, between
That would
you and
be
me,
preposterous. Yeah.
this is what they would do because Common Core was an across the board rollout. Now, between you and me, and I say this as not a professional educator, but as someone who has changed schools, who has been through other changes in curriculum while I was in a given school, and who has seen this happen to others, what I believe should happen, which is done by which very few people think to do, is when you institute a curriculum, do it the first year in kindergarten, the second year in kindergarten, first grade, the third year kindergarten, first and second grade. Let it move up along with the children who will be taking those
Hmm.
classes. And nobody thinks to do it. In fact, even in most handwriting programs, when a handwriting program is introduced to a school, most handwriting program publishers will say, boom, buy it for the whole school at once, switch everyone over at once. I know exactly one publisher who does not do it, but whose normal advice has been to do it year by year and make it optional for the people whom it
Hmm.
wouldn't have reached yet. That publisher, if you're curious, is handwritingsuccess.com, which I believe to be the best publisher of handwriting materials in the world at present. I won't hide from you that the company owner, Jonathan Dubay, is a close friend of mine. He has got some terrific stuff, although one day I want to publish my own handwriting curriculum and do even better than his stuff.
I think you can do that. By the
Yeah,
way, we
I
have
can. Well,
two
I
comments.
can do it if my publisher says to do it, and my publisher
Yeah.
says she'll only say to do it if Read Cursive Fast sells 1,000 copies,
Well, we're
because
gonna
that keeps
try
it in
and
print, and then I could do more books.
yeah. We have two comments, by the way. So the first one is the Nepal. Okay, your friend from the All Nepal Handwriting
Yes, that
Institute.
would be Deependra Shakya. He is a very good friend of mine.
Yeah, and he writes, greetings from Kathmandu, Nepal. Conversation is really useful for handwriting lovers. All love from Nepal, Namaste. And then we have Inverted A Press, and they're letting us know that they can grandfather the fifth graders who did not study a foreign language when they institute it. So we have
Well,
a
good.
couple.
Well, they
Yeah, a
could,
couple.
but the problem is people don't think to do this. I have literally known of schools where I have to tell you a story that has nothing to do from handwriting,
That's okay.
but
Yeah.
that I like to tell because it illustrates Mark Twain's statement that Mark Twain had a joke that in the beginning of the universe, God created an idiot, and that was for practice. And then God created a school board. Because this is what has happened to me in a school I was aware of. The school is fortunately closed now, but at the time that I was aware of them, they literally had been changing their handwriting program every year and wondering why nothing worked. And even very good programs, I think, would not have a chance of success in that way unless people were shown what's the relationship among all the programs, which I could have done, which they were not doing. It was literally this year the cursive capital I looks this way. Last year it looked that way. Next year it will look another way. Literally because they would buy a program and be dissatisfied, buy another program. And even though handwriting program companies often hold the schools that buy them or the districts that buy them to 7-year contracts, these people were not, were buying from resellers. They were literally going onto eBay or Amazon and buying a bunch of books and not, of course, not getting any training, because handwriting program companies often offer training, but not a lot of them take it. And then, of course, you sometimes had teachers who didn't open the books because they said, I'm a teacher, I know how to write, I don't need to know, what
That's
a
so
capital Q is.
presumptuous. You need
So there were actually some teachers who basically wouldn't look at the books, but the kids had to follow the book. So the kids would be following a certain rule of how to space things or a certain rule of how to write certain letters. And the teacher would say, no, that's not how you do an H or whatever. And it would turn out on inspection, when irate parents came in to inspect, that the kid was upset because the kid was actually following the book and the teacher wasn't. The teacher was writing, as most of us do, her or his personal handwriting, which is not a problem if you know the differences and are frank in discussing it. In other words, if I write a lowercase g and it's a little different from some book I give someone, I point out, yeah, mine looks a little different on the bottom.
Yeah, you should do that.
And we're
A good
both
teacher
right.
would do that.
But if the teacher thinks that what's in the book that he or she never looked at is his or her personal handwriting, you can see the potential for huge issues. And I would even say, a bit of traumatic stress. Now, what else was crazy? You can see that this was not just someone being thoughtless about handwriting, curriculum, sequence, but about everything. The school at one point had been teaching French. The French teacher very suddenly required or quit or something, or fell ill, but anyway was not available. Everyone at the school was required to take 2 years of a foreign language. So what they did was they looked for another teacher who could teach them. They couldn't find any French teachers. They didn't want to lower their academic standards by just excusing all the second year students from taking a second year of a language. So they advertised, help wanted, language teacher. They took a very good teacher who showed up. The catch was that teacher did not know French and did not teach French. She was Japanese and she taught Japanese. Now imagine taking first year French and coming back from summer vacation and being placed in second year Japanese.
That would be a
Do I
little
have
problematic.
to say anything? And what was really amazing was that the administrator, who happened to be a monolingual individual, did not see why this was a problem. He spoke English, and English was what he
Yeah,
spoke, and he just
he's
didn't
not.
realize different languages are different, sir.
Of course. Yeah. Different
I
languages are
don't know
completely
how
different.
he thought. I don't know how he or anyone thought that this would work, but let's just say that there was a reason that the school was soon closed. I don't know the circumstances of its closing, but I would say that if I had a kid in school and the kid had gotten, let's say, A's in French last year, well, not last year, we're talking, A's in French 1 year. Yeah, I can't say last year because we're talking, this was before the whole Corona thing, and then came back and is suddenly greeted not just with a textbook in Japanese, but a textbook in second year Japanese. I mean, I could deal with someone taking first year French, first year Japanese. Okay, a bit of two languages, that's not bad. But being moved from first year French to second year Japanese is, I
That's,
think, and it's not just stupid. It's an insult. I would say that it's an insult to a person's capacity to learn, and in a weird way, this is very much what we do in handwriting. Even if you have one handwriting curriculum, if it's what I call a two-tier curriculum, print and then suddenly a very, very flourished cursive. So you're going from the plainest, most rigid thing possible to the diametrical opposite. And there is nothing in between, no route in between. That is
yeah.
also correct. I mean, you are really disenfranchising the kids because you're saying there's only one way to be right, when actually there are more than one ways to be right. And since all the variants of G, capital G, just to take an example I like because it's tough and it's in my name, they all relate, as I've shown you.
Yeah,
They
you're right.
they have all had their prevalence at different periods of our history. And even capital and lowercase g have a relationship, a more distant relationship, but that can also be shown. Even even this can be shown. So why do you have to make it harder than necessary? If you can show them, here are different ways to do a G. All the ones that actually are G have these in common. If
Hmm.
it has some other things or it's missing some of these, it's not a G. You can give people a spectrum, a ballpark within which to be right, rather than say, rather than have to say there's only one true right and only way and nothing else exists, when we can see daily that it exists.
For
Deb, to
sure.
tell you a story, and this is actually from a handwriting company that I used to know some people at, and I don't want to give their name. They're still in business. They are very much a company that loves cursive, and they have some very brilliant people working there, and they are very into the flourishes. And I don't want to give the name. So there's one guy whom I'll call Rob, which is not his name, but does start with the same letter.
Hmm.
And he was working with a company about 10 or 15 years ago to create, computer software that would teach handwriting. And he had a brilliant idea, which I actually like, that a letter model would be on the screen and that it would work like a video game. You'd start at a certain spot, you would go trace the letter, you'd have to stay on track, which would be the shape of the letter, and you would have to do it at increasing speeds, which I thought was a terrific idea. The problem was that when the designer or anyone at the company used this to demonstrate it, even though they all actually give them credit, were doing beautiful cursive according to their own model. They were at least following their textbooks, which so many people will not do. The computer would always beep, 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 send up a red flag or
Oh,
whatever. In
gee.
other words, they couldn't do it as precisely as they wanted people to be able to do it. I believe that there has to be, some leeway. But what was the problem was that at the time they were demonstrating it, according to this individual himself, he never had a successful demonstration. So he'd basically gone to selling the system without demonstrating it. I don't know how
That's,
well that worked for him. I have to say, it was sort of hard for me to have a serious conversation after that. Now, I don't claim to be perfect. You've seen me write. You've seen it's not exactly perfect, but I think we can all say that there are flaws that don't have tendencies to crash the handwriting system, and there are flaws that do. And when
that
you
do
and
definitely. Yeah.
some cursive, some letter formations are more accident prone from others, and some styles are. And the problem with a conventional cursive with all the flourishes and with the requirement of joining everything, even things that do not really join easily,
Yeah,
is
it's hard
that
for
it's
kids,
horrendously
adults. Yes.
accident prone. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's there for people who can do it, people who like it and can do it well. I am not telling them no.
Oh no,
But
you've
I'm
never said
saying
that,
that
but I do think it's hard for people to write fast if they're required to write in cursive. That's
yes, and I would say some people can do very, very well, but we are different. If we have a system of education, and if pretty much everyone is supposed to end up being literate, we should not have a system in which the writing component of literacy is something that not everyone can do, or that most people cannot do. If we want to use a transport analogy, most cities have a transport system and they have buses, and recently they have done improvements to the design of the buses so that the more people possible can get on. In Albany, New York, where I live, and in many other towns, there are even buses that have a ramp that comes out when the driver sees someone who uses a wheelchair or crutches, so
yes,
that
and it
they
it
won't
goes
have to do a
down. Yeah.
step. And there are special seats up front, even with belts to tie down the wheelchair if you've got one. Now, I would say that is, that makes it possible for people to get to place by bus. But what if the city government said, we don't have to accommodate everyone? We should have buses for the most coordinated and the best people. In fact, our buses
Uh,
should be unicycles. So
oh
imagine if
no.
someone decides, to decide that the way you have to write, if you are getting any fluency at all beyond the most childish printing stage, if you decide that there's nothing, to use our analogy, it would be as if the only two methods of transit you had were walking and unicycles. And you couldn't have anything else, no bikes, no mopeds, no scooters, no cars, because someone had decided that unicycles were the perfect transport, or the most graceful looking
That would
transport.
be.
That is what we're imposing. And we're imposing two systems in quick succession with no hint of their relationship. I believe everyone should know how to read cursive, and everyone should be shown how cursive happened. But you should
In
have a
a
choice.
relationship.
Yeah, but you should have a choice on whether to write that way too. And to the extent you're being shown how to write it, why not have gradations, much as
Well,
I
you
do in
have
my
great
cursive stories?
examples. You have
In
great
fact, if
examples.
you look at some handwriting programs in parts of some other countries like Australia, if you look at Australia, for instance, I've seen handwriting programs from there which were terrific. Many of them are basically italic programs under another name. In other words, a very streamlined print and then a few optional joins. The programs that aren't, like in these, such as in the state of Victoria, even though they start with a very simple printing, much like you'd see in the USA, and they end up with a very elaborate cursive, they do it by stages. Every year, you get another few features to add in. You're shown how to read them, and you actually have the option, or at least your teacher has the option, of not necessarily doing everything that you're being taught to read. And I think, that even though I'm not crazy about the Victoria, Australia handwriting models, they do have some flaws. I believe that particular idea of implementation is a superb one. Make
Mhm.
sure that everyone understands what they're seeing, and make sure that those who want to write it can do it, but don't give them this idiocy of, you cannot really say that you can't read, a writing system unless you can write it, which is one of the two big arguments that have been used to maintain and add cursive mandates in this country, to the point that people even misquote the research to present those arguments. And it sounds commonsensical to say, yeah, you can't read something unless you write it, but then you'd have to explain how people who are born quadriplegic with paralysis ever learn how to read. Or, you
That's
would
a good
also have to
point. Yeah,
explain.
because you take the initiative, like you make an initiative. I feel like, they always want to make disabled people feel like, oh, they need all these special tools. And yes, you do need some tools, but a lot of people that are paraplegics, they're going to take the initiative. So if somebody's having a hard time reading
Right.
cursive,
And
I feel like
yeah. And if
they
you
take
were
initiative for it.
congenital paraplegic, You know, like what? Would we stop teaching paraplegics how to read because they couldn't write? I mean, although a lot of them can, because you can hold a pencil in your mouth, and there are,
Yeah.
you know, actually even apps that will read your eye movements. So you could sit in, if you can move your eyes, you could trace an eye with your letter. In fact, there was some research recently. I'll have to find the link for it after the show if you remind
Okay.
me, where someone actually created a system where they had something measuring brain waves of someone who is not a congenital paraplegic, but he had lost the use of his limbs, but he was able to imagine drawing, writing the letter, and the computer could actually follow his thoughts and literally write it as he was thinking of it. But the whole argument that we have to read, that we can only read what we have learned to write, is so fallacious that I am actually doing something now which will actually, you know, which is actually going to show you. I'm going to have to, you know, I'm going to have to, you know, switch the camera again.
Okay.
I wish there would be
That's
an easy
good.
way
I
to
love
do this.
seeing your like
Now
demos.
we have, look at this. On the left side, we have three letters as they might appear in some standard text type. And on the right, we have them as they might more likely be printed or handwritten. And no, very, very few people write any of the letter forms on the left side. I mean, I myself do it for G, but maybe not when I'm teaching someone. Most of us would write more like what's on the right side, more or
Hmm.
less. But and at some point we did all have to be told, okay, how, you know, how is this a G, how is this an A? We did all have to be told that.
That's
But once
true.
we were told this, you know, we eventually learned it just through frequency, through seeing these letters. Now we could have been told actually to see the interrelations in another way, which I'm going to actually draw for A. I'm trying to
Okay.
learn the fine art of drawing on a whiteboard while holding a camera. This, if we know that this is a capital A, how did we
Definitely.
get to the small a of whatever
Yeah. Good
variety it
question.
may be? Watch this. This is a rather fast and scribbly A, looks rather antique. We have this.
Is that the
We have
Phoenician
this.
A?
Yes, but it also comes up in handwriting. If you are doing an a capital A, and if you're doing it the way that it tended to be done in ancient civilizations, left, middle, right, when you speed up, it will get something like this, and it will look like that old Phoenician Canaanite one. You have some very early sort of fall of Rome ones that have these sorts of shapes. You have this shape, which was, you know, about 8th, 9th century. Then, of course, you know, I'm leaving out the whole black letter period just because these are basically riffs on that. But you
Hmm.
can have, once you have something like this, you had this Renaissance version, which became this Renaissance version. In other words, if this is how you're writing an A, and you're working all day writing documents of the Vatican, or, you know, inventorying the products of your vineyard, you know, you're going to go and merge the strokes.
Hmm.
And once you see how it happened, how could we get from this to not only this, but this? Once you see how it happened, it makes sense. Or my favorite example, because there are so many people in the world who have dyslexia and who have to work very, very hard to stop, you know, mixing up their B's and T's. Let me just erase this,
Okay.
if I may, and I would get some room. Have you ever wondered, Julia, how it is that we have a printed capital D and we have
Yeah.
a
I was gonna ask.
cursive
Actually, gonna.
capital
I was gonna
D?
ask you about that.
Oh,
Why
and
did we?
then how come the
Yeah.
lowercase d, you know, like why does the round part on this one point to the right and this one point to the left? You
Parts to
know,
the left.
was
What
there
is the
someone
reason?
long, long ago, you know, who hated all little children and was saying, I'm going to make this difficult? No, not at all. This is a capital D of a very early form. And we tend to think of D as top down, top down. Back then, it was a stylized triangle. So it was very much top down, bottom up.
Mhm.
Admittedly, if you had a brush, you might do something like this because you wouldn't want to break the brush. But conceptually, it was almost a triangle, just as we have in Greek. In Greek now, the D, the delta, is a triangle.
Mhm.
Now watch this. If this is a D, then you're speeding up. This is a D. This is a D. This is a D. This is a D.
Oh.
once you know what happened, literally the straight part morphed into the curve, and the curve morphed into the straight part.
Oh, that's interesting. So you explain it. Like, I love that you have those examples in your book that explains it, because like you were saying earlier, I had the teachers who said, well, this is just the way it is, write what's on the board.
And like
Yeah,
people
I had
assume,
that.
you know, if you survey people and you ask them, well, how long has our cursive been? They say like 3,000 years, 4,000 years. They think, you know, because they think, well, how long has our alphabet been around? But there are many styles. In fact, if you go onto YouTube, type in evolution of the alphabet, and you will see videos with animations and cartoons that explain everything better than I could do it. Now I'm going to give you something weird. Have you ever wondered how come in English and most languages the capital I does not have a dot, but the lowercase I has to? Ever wonder about that?
Yeah, that's interesting. And like, yes, I do wonder about that. And
well, we're going to teach you right now. As you know, the capital I, the letter I, even before a capital small dichotomy existed, there were many shapes, but the most common in many cultures has been something that's basically a stylized stick. Now, if you have this, your natural tendency would be, once people's tendency to write faster and smaller became the invention of lowercase, you'd expect this. But what happens if you have a word like, with a lot of letters that have downstrokes, like a lot of M's and N's and some I's, like let's say the word minimum. And I don't have my calligraphy pens out here today. Now we
well,
can
you're doing
read
really
minimum
good.
very easily now. But what if you were writing it sometime in earlier centuries before that dot was invented? Whether you were doing medieval black letter or some other earlier or later kind of hand, minimum looks great. But if they didn't have that dot, you'd have like so there literally grew up a habit of putting a little tiny letter I over the actual letter I to show you where the letter I was, because suddenly you could read it. Now, for those who know about the history of our writing, the letter J actually originated as a variation on the letter I. In other words, make it longer to show it's a slightly different sound, a Y or a J sound, depending what language you're talking about here.
Yeah.
So at one point, we did not have the shapes that we now call J, or for that matter, U. Julius Caesar would have written his first name as, but he would have pronounced it
Oh, my
Julius.
namesake. Yeah, Julius Caesar.
Yeah, so that's why I'm getting into J, partly because of you. Now, because J was developed out of I, but J was developed after I had developed its dot. J was born with a dot. So that's why J, so J has a dot. Even, by the way, there are some languages where I actually does not follow this English rule of dotted if it's lowercase and don't dot if it's capital.
Would that be Turkish,
if
by the way?
capital is big enough, you can see it's an I. You were saying?
In Turkish, because they have a lot of like.
That's right. In Turkish, this is E, and this is I think it's pronounced. I know a very, very little Turkish, and this actually was, done by the person who invented the modern Turkish alphabet to replace the variant of Arabic script. If you look up the history of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who was, depending on what you think of him politically, either a great liberator or a great dictator. And I understand in Turkey you wish to call him a great liberator if you don't want to see the inside of a Turkish prison.
You need to be careful in Turkey, guys.
But one of the things he did was that the Arabic script, as it was being used, did not fit the Turkish language very well. It didn't have letters for a lot of sounds that Turkish uses, and it had, and there were other problems which I'm not qualified to talk about. There are people, I'm sure, who are watching this who know Turkish, and if not, they probably have friends who do. But when Mustafa Kemal, who renamed himself Kemal Atatürk, father of the Turks, when he came into power, he decided one thing that was needed was to have the same alphabet as the European countries, because he wanted to be aligned with them. this might be a little better position for.
Oh,
There's one of my I have many whiteboards, and there's a little portable one. I have many of them.
I like
Well, one
it.
thing he decided was that since there was an E sound and there was an I sound and there was no letter that actually meant the I sound in the alphabet he was trying to adapt, namely the Roman alphabet, well, he looked around and apparently he literally said, well, here's a letter that sometimes has a dot and sometimes doesn't have a dot and sometimes does. And you can't put the dot here, but you must put the dot here. That's dumb. In other words, it might as well be two different letters. And then
Yeah,
you could take care
exactly.
of two different sounds.
There you
So
go.
so so in other words, he had a reason for inventing it, but the reason that most alphabets, most versions of the Roman alphabet have an undotted capital and have a dotted lowercase is that you would really need the dot for the lowercase if the handwriting was, a lengthy word or a word where anything was connected. In
Mhm.
fact, if you've ever wondered why the capital I, why we have why do we capitalize an I? Why don't we just write it, lowercase? I mean, we don't put a capital M on me. You ever wondered about that?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
have been
it's
curious.
not because, it's not because we're overwhelming monsters of egotism. What it is simply that once the word for I, the word I in English used to be in Anglo-Saxon, it used to be ich. I see, pronounced almost as it is in German today. In the middle, but of course, not a dot because this was, of course, back in like the year 700, 800. The language began to change. This final consonant was left. The word for I, me, was I. Now it's pronounced I because of a sound change that happened a little before the lifetime of Shakespeare. But this could be lost in text. In other words, write something that uses the word I several times and use a lowercase and don't put a dot on it, you'll see it will just get lost. Now, since the notion of having a dot had not taken hold at the time that people all over England but nowhere else were confronted with this problem of the mysteriously vanishing first person pronoun, well, they knew of capital forms. So at some point in the late Middle Ages, you did start to see a capital originate because capital and lowercase, once capital versus lowercase was a thing,
Mhm.
then of course you could use this to make the difference. Otherwise, we would have this and it would be horrible. I think it would be,
But yeah, it would be so
imagine
horrible.
reading something like, I wish to withdraw a minimum amount. And imagine that all of those I's were undotted and that the pronoun one was, was not capitalized. You could
Oh,
very easily skip it over.
you could for sure.
Eye fatigue is a thing, and we sometimes call it eye skip in the scribe business when our
Ooh.
eye skips a word or skips a line and or skips a phrase. And we've all done this, right, copying from something where there was a word on one line and we skipped down to where it was again 3 lines below, or we skipped back to where it was 2 lines above and we ended up copying things twice. I think we have all done this both in handwriting and typesetting. But, we could tell people, okay, we have these rules and we may not love these rules. But if you're going to if you're going to teach kids that cursive flourishes exist, and certainly if you're going to teach them, oh, yes, I want you to write them, you have an obligation. If you're teaching them a feature of a language, I would say teach them how it happened to make it more memorable. When you don't teach people features of how their language came to be as it is and came to be written as it is, you very easily set it up for mistakes. I will show you something. I know someone who, whenever he wants to write the word visa, as in you'll need to get a visa for travel to Italy or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
this individual very frequently misspells it, and he, even though he knows how to pronounce it, he writes it, or most of the time he accidentally
Alicia.
writes it Vizia. Why? He doesn't think about, from knowing him, I think that he doesn't think what letters represent what sounds. He doesn't think about
Yeah.
all the ways. He knows that this stands for v when we make the sound v. He knows that this is s. He knows that this is a vowel. He knows that these are vowels. but he doesn't think, what does this represent? He just knows it's common for words from Latin to end with something like IA, and subconsciously he just pops this in.
Oh,
If he
interesting.
thought about it, he would probably know visa, that there's really no spelling trap here, but because he's so used to seeing combinations, he basically pops them in on the basis of their frequency. You
That's
know,
true.
I do suspect this individual of being dyslexic, although he has not been diagnosed.
It could
But
be. That's a possibility.
it's a, you know, it's not something where I've been in a position to raise it to him. Let's say, I see things that make me suspect, but I'm not going to sit here and claim for sure, because a lot of what we see in dyslexia, we can also see in perfectly ordinary people if their reading instruction has not covered certain bits of the interrelations between letters and letter combinations and the sounds we make when we see them.
That's true. That's a good point.
And I think handwriting can be one tool to address this, if only because when you write by hand, you are forced to concentrate on one letter after another. In other
Hmm.
words, you could theoretically have the guy sit down, have him spell visa, and stop him when he wrote the second I that he put in, and say, what sound did you think this stood for? In other words, teaching reading with writing by hand as part of the picture possibly opens some opportunities for some teaching techniques that are harder to do if you're just typing, and the individual I'm thinking of does do most of his written communication by typing.
Oh, that's a good point. So I was wondering, since we are getting near the hour mark,
Yeah.
was there any closing thoughts for the show, like thoughts about cursive, about learning to read cursive that you want to share with our audience before we sign off?
I would say this. We want to learn to read cursive, if only because we could see something that's just very mundane that we want to see. Imagine walking down the street and seeing 5 shop signs, and they're all in cursive, and you're wondering, which store did your girlfriend or your boyfriend tell you to meet at? Or
Yeah.
imagine finding lost family papers and being unable to read them. What if he found a bundle of papers, had to take them to someone at a museum, a trained archivist or paleographer, to read? And imagine if he starts reading them to you and it turns out it's your grandma's love letters to your grandpa.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and imagine you might have wanted this, whatever was in those letters, you might not have wanted a total stranger to be the first person to read them after 70 years. That's
Yeah,
all.
for sure.
But I would also just say that I have actually seen things miscatalogued in libraries because someone creating a card for an electronic card catalog, which they are now, was looking at a title page written in cursive and was looking at something in a foreign language and didn't recognize maybe that a certain letter was an R instead of a C, or an A instead of an O. And I can recognize it looking for the book because I know the language. So I basically know what mistakes to look up if I'm looking for a book and I know the title. I literally know what handwritten typos to look up, but someone else might not know. Someone might think the book
That's
has
true.
vanished, the book is not there, when it's simply that it couldn't be found because what if the title of the book was Alexander, but whoever entered it into the computer system looking at a fancy handwritten cursive title page, which I was at one point for some bio, thought that the A was an O,
Oh, yeah.
maybe got
Big
the
deal.
L right, didn't know, he thought that the EX was like a CR or something. And I literally have seen computer records filled out with question marks where the person couldn't decipher it, and it went through somehow. And imagine if someone wrote a biography of, let's say, Alexander the Great or Alexander Hamilton, and I couldn't find it because someone had put it in the computer system as starting with O.
Oh,
Imagine.
you would be
I
lost.
mean, I would basically, there have been times, and admittedly, this was more often when we still had card catalogs that had been typed by some poor person, some poor right worker out off of handwriting than now, but it still does happen. You know, I mean, there have been times when I had to guess, assume this book might have been cataloged by someone not understanding what he's reading. You know, I used an English example, but I've seen it happen in French and German, for instance. You know, sometimes you'll catalog a language, you won't know what the word is or what the name is. You might not know the quirks of penmanship of that particular language. And certainly, you know, 19th century German had some quirks of its own. 18th century French had
Oh,
some
for
quirks of its
sure.
own.
Yeah.
You know, but you might not know that you didn't know. You might assume this language looked like an R was an R if it was an X, which actually happened in a German book I saw once. You know,
Oh my God.
you might assume all sorts of things if you didn't know that there were places you could look up, or you just assumed, well, it looks this way, it has to be this way, or you don't know, you're tired, you just want to get through your shift and go home, and you know, you just put in anything. I mean, people do that. They
They do
shouldn't,
that,
but
and it's a shame. I think we need to be more careful. Don't just be like, because you could hurt somebody, like
yes.
doing
And I
research.
would
Like,
also say that if we can learn to read a variety of writings, we are better equipped with dealing with the ones we've never seen.
true.
And you know, not everything can be documented, but if you get a feel for the ballpark, if you get a feel for what kinds of things can be an uppercase G or an uppercase J or an uppercase
Hmm.
Q, then you will be better set to deal with anyone's individual handwriting or with something historical. And
That's
this does happen. In fact, even though we don't want to write a lot, some of us, every so often, I think some of us at some times do still pick up a pen and write things. Those things are not always in print. Those things, whether they're printed or cursive, are not even clear. So we want to be a bit of a detective, and that's why a little logo that appears throughout the book is a little picture of a little kid with a magnifying
Oh
glass, you
yes,
know.
I love
And
it.
that's why that actually was created by our illustrator.
Oh
I basically said we need a little detective character, and she came up with this adorable little guy.
yeah, I've seen him in several different. Oh yes, here he is. Very
So why don't
fun.
you
I
show
think
us? As far as I know, we never gave a name to him. I just call him Detective Guy. You
I
know,
would call him the Cursive Detective.
I know, but I just didn't think it sounded so good.
I
I
know
did
you're
play around some
right.
possibilities.
Well, maybe if you can
I've
think a
decided to
better
stick
name,
with
yeah,
Detective Guy. I will
Detective
tell
Guy.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, I will tell you that if anyone has better suggestions for a name, if anyone wants to suggest different names, if I get at least 10 suggestions, I'll ask my publisher if she wants to pick one for the website.
Oh, what a great idea! So in the comments when this video ends, because we're getting ready to sign
Yeah,
off,
in other
go
words,
ahead
say
and tell.
something like, I think his name is Detective Guy, or I think his name is Scripty Sherlock, or whatever you think.
Oh, yeah, we'll have our. Let's hope that we get some commenters that engage with that. But once again,
Because I'll
I
tell
think
you, if we get at least 10, I can't guarantee everything, but I'll say people have volunteered a name for a Detective Guy. Can we pick one? And if she says yes, you know, I don't know if we can get, I can't promise any prizes,
yeah, no
but of
promises, but
course I could. But of course, if we end up having a name, I'll try to put it someplace on my website and say, and this name was coined by, you know, our audience member, whatever is your name,
mhm,
you know.
that's great.
I don't know if she'd authorize me to give a prize, you know, but that would even depend on whether she liked the idea.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Well,
And I will
thank.
tell you, since he appears to, I say guy, but he could as easily be a she. I basically like to be an equal opportunity name giver. So I
Yeah,
will
there
tell
you
you that
go.
names which can suit either gender, either sex, I think will be very welcome, you know, so keep that in mind.
That's a
I
great suggestion, and I think people will love that you made that suggestion. You know.
Great. Okay, so any other questions before we knock off for the day?
I don't have any other questions, but I just want to say, like, is there anything else that you can recommend? Well, I do have a question. Where is the best place to buy this book? Would you say
I would
Amazon or your website?
say, well, it's going to cost you a little more on Amazon. I
Okay.
would say that you can buy directly from me or from the publisher. If you buy from me, it's a little more work because I have to sit at home packing a book.
Okay.
Frankly, I would say, you know, you might want to buy from the publisher. I will tell you that the price is less than on Amazon if it's from me or from the publisher. But if you buy from the publisher, there's free shipping if you buy more than $99 worth of books.
Oh, okay.
Given the
No.
price of the book from the publisher, you could buy 8 and get free shipping, and that takes care of, gift ideas for people. However, if you buy from me and if you put in the notes field with your order, please autograph this, I will autograph it. That is not going to happen from the publisher or from
Oh no.
Amazon. I mean, you can always buy a book and take it to me if we meet someplace. That's fine. But I will tell you, at the moment, I don't have that many books on hand. Last time I checked, I have 19 books on hand. And if you order after that, you're going to have to wait, until I
Okay.
buy more books. And I tell you, frankly, it's easier for me if you buy from the publisher. I make a teensy bit more, packaging them, I think, than if you buy from the publisher. But then again, that's extra work for me. Why not buy from the publisher and make her happy? Or if you want
Okay.
to buy an Amazon, that's great. I would also like to suggest that when you buy this, whether you buy it in Amazon or not, please leave a review on Amazon,
Mhm.
especially if you bought it from Amazon, because reviews from people who bought the product from Amazon count for more, as those are verified customer reviews.
That's a good point. After we finish, I want you to send me the link to the publisher, so if people want to buy a larger
I'll
quantity, they
tell
can
you
do that.
what, I could give you the link. Or I could give you the link right now. Just let me get off. I'm going to send you a message in Messenger
Okay,
right now,
sounds good.
and that will have the link, and then you can post it, okay?
I'll
Yeah.
definitely post it. Okay,
Okay, so just give me a second
no
so I
worries.
can
Gonna go
do it.
check.
Okay, so say just publisher, and then it will have a URL, which is okay. Okay, and I just sent it.
Okay, I'm gonna
Okay,
put
I
it here in
just
the
sent it,
chat.
and the link is in Messenger, and it's the link directly to the actual page for the book.
Oh, it didn't really show up. I'm gonna have to add it to the description afterwards.
Give me a
Okay.
minute. By the way, can you hear me when I'm out of here? Give me a minute. I'm just going to see if I can remember it long enough to read it aloud to you. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's see. Okay, just give me a minute. Okay, just a second. I'll get back to you in a jiffy.
I think I found
Okay.
it.
If you found it, why don't you just post it? I hate
Yeah, I'm gonna
giving
do that. It wasn't
because I
okay. Now
hate
it's
giving dictation.
yeah. Let me just go ahead. It just wasn't. I copied it. That
And
was my
by the
bad, guys.
way, I should let those of you know who wish to order from the publisher that if you want to order and resell it, let's say you're a school teacher or a business owner or a stationery store owner or I know a librarian, you can actually ask her how to be an authorized reseller. It's a very simple process and it is cost free. Now, the authorized resellers don't get the free shipping deal, but what they do get is 30% to 40% off the cost of the book. Whether it's 30% or 40% depends if they're drop shipping or doing it, or doing the shipping directly. But
Mhm.
if anyone who is watching this wishes to become an authorized reseller, if there's a press that wants to distribute it or a school that would like to buy it and sell it in the school store or anything, you know, it's a very simple, it's like a couple steps, free process. You can ask me. I will tell you that if you email me, and you can share my email address, kate at
Okay.
readcursivefast.com, tell people that if they want to be authorized resellers and they write to me at that address and they put the words authorized reseller in the message, I can sit down every so often, filter for those words, and then write back and say, if you want to be an authorized reseller, here's how to do it.
Okay, great. So
So
I
just so
think
be free. So feel free to reach me about this because we could certainly use authorized resellers to help distribute this. And I
great.
think
So
you have a connection with some press. I don't know if your press ever distributes anything from other people, but
I don't personally, but what I'm going to be doing is a big push on your book, and I'm going to be sharing it a lot more. And I want us to do more talks. Like that's my plan. If you want to do it,
super.
maybe we can do it once a month or every other month. We'll see what
I
works for
would
you.
like to do this. Now, one thing I would consider doing is I could go and give how to learn to read cursive lessons based on the book bit by bit by bit by bit. You
Okay.
wouldn't necessarily need to have the book to participate, but it would be a big help. I could also go and do handwriting lessons if there are people who want some basic tips to improve their handwriting. We could
Okay.
do a few tips with every lessons, either just off the top of my head or have people who are interested send in their handwriting and I would go through it. You wouldn't have to send your name. I could just say the person who wrote this is an adult and this is what this person wrote and here are some ways to improve. I know that not everyone wants to be singled out, but if multiple letters were sent in, we would pick which one to do each week. Basically, pick the best looking or the worst looking or the most interesting one or the one, that presented the most common problems. So we wouldn't necessarily. Oh my God, I see a comment from someone I know. Hi,
I know, I
Janet.
just added it there. So I think that was a wonderful comment. And I think,
Yes. I'd love to
well,
see the comments. I probably, I won't
yeah.
see any others like it off unless you put them. Were there any other cool ones?
The three that we had, I put on the screen. So what we will do
Yeah,
is
I
next time
wasn't
we're gonna.
able to see them because I was like
No, I'm
focused. So
sorry. Let me
we had
see.
Janet, we had Deependra. I just
And we had
didn't notice the
December
others
today.
because it could have been when I switched out reposition. So who
Oh
was
no,
the other one?
it was Inverted A, Chandra, and Janet. So
Oh,
those were the
well,
three great.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, that is really, really great.
Yes,
Anyway,
definitely.
if anyone is interested in having their handwriting worked with, like it's like sort of a reality show for handwriting, like those ultimate makeover shows, but this would be for handwriting.
Okay.
I would say to write Julia because then she will see, if you want to be an authorized reseller, write to me and I'll get you the info. If you want to decide to be on this show to be helped with learning to read cursive and or with handwriting, or
Yeah.
maybe if you have a kid or friend or employee or loved one you want to bring, I would say for that you want to contact Julia because she's the one putting these shows together.
Yeah. Just contact me, let me know, and then we'll get back to Kate about
Yes.
how we could put that
And I
together.
would say do it this year. This year I'm willing to we'll do it for free and call it our coronavirus back to school special.
There you
Do it
go.
now because when 2022 rolls around, I might decide to think about money. So
Yeah,
do it
there we
now
go.
and consider it our promotional special as the world, returns to school.
So normal. Yeah. With that, I guess
Yes.
I will sign off. The great book. And thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
Have a great
Bye.
day. Bye.
Bye.